Billionaire poses as a poor woman to find a truthful nanny for her twins. Their only help was their real dad. Frank A. Barnett froze in the middle of the downtown sidewalk when he saw them. A young woman and two little girls sitting on the curb with a cardboard sign that read, "We need a nanny. No money, just heart." The girls' dresses were faded and mismatched, their faces streaked with tears, and one of them was gripping her mother's arm like she might disappear. Frank's chest tightened. "Lord, these are babies," he whispered. People rushed past like the family was invisible. One woman even stepped over their small cup, collecting nothing but hope. The mother, thin and exhausted with her head bowed low, held her daughters close as if shielding them from the world's cruelty. Frank stepped forward, his work boots heavy on the concrete. "Ma'am, why are your babies out here like this? Where's their father?" The woman slowly raised her head, and the moment their eyes met, Frank felt something in his spirit snap. A strange, powerful pull he couldn't explain. The twins stared up at him with wide, haunting eyes that felt impossibly familiar, eyes he swore he had seen in dreams he couldn't remember. Before he could speak again, the smallest girl whispered, "Mister, please don't leave us." Frank's breath caught. Why did it feel like his heart already belonged to these children he'd never met? Before we start, hit subscribe and like this video. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us create more great content, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Now, let's dive into the story. Moments earlier. Sarah H. Cooper sat on the cold concrete sidewalk, her back pressed against the wall of an abandoned storefront. Her head was lowered beneath a torn scarf, her clothes deliberately stained and frayed at the edges. Her shoes were scuffed like they had walked through 1,000 broken promises. Anyone passing by would never guess the truth, that beneath those ragged layers was a 35-year-old black billionaire, the CEO of Cooper Enterprises, and one of the most powerful women in the country. But none of that mattered today. Today she was just a nameless woman sitting beside her 6-year-old twin daughters, Lila and Luna, holding a cardboard sign that read, "We need a nanny. No money, just heart." Her hands trembled. Her pride trembled harder. Yet she forced herself to remain still, to observe, to wait. This was the 4th week of her secret mission, searching for someone who could love her daughters without knowing her wealth. Someone who could see children before seeing opportunity. Someone who could be trusted in a world where Sarah had learned to trust no one. People walked past without looking. A few dropped coins that clattered into an empty cup. Some whispered cruel assumptions as they hurried by, their judgment sharp and careless. Sarah exhaled slowly, pulling Lila and Luna closer. "Maybe this is foolish," she murmured to herself. "Or maybe this is exactly what my babies need." A shadow fell over her. A man's voice, deep but gentle, spoke with unexpected tenderness. "Ma'am, are y'all okay? Have you eaten today?" Sarah looked up. Frank A. Barnett stood there, late 30s, black, strong despite the weariness in his eyes. He wore a utility worker's uniform, dirt on his sleeves and exhaustion written across his face. In his calloused hands, he held a brown paper bag with his lunch and a bottle of water. We're managing," Sarah muttered, slipping deeper into character, testing him with her tone. Frank shook his head, slowly kneeling on the sidewalk in front of them. "No, ma'am, I don't think you are." He opened the bag and pulled out a turkey sandwich wrapped in foil, still warm. "Here. Please. Take this." He set the sandwich and water bottle in front of Lila and Luna, whose eyes went wide. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 crumpled $20 bills, clearly all the cash he had. "It's not much, but your girls need to eat." Sarah stared at the money in shock, her carefully crafted disguise nearly cracking. This man, this stranger wearing a uniform that meant he likely lived paycheck to paycheck, was giving them everything. He wasn't filming for social media. He wasn't preaching or lecturing. He wasn't asking questions or demanding gratitude. He was just giving. With dignity. With love. Frank looked at the twins, and something strange happened. His expression shifted. Confusion, recognition, wonder, as if he was seeing something he couldn't name. Lila and Luna stared back at him with the same intensity, their small hands reaching toward him instinctively. Frank's voice broke when he spoke again. What are their names? Lila and Luna, Sarah whispered. Watching this moment she couldn't explain. Lila. Luna. Frank repeated their names like a prayer, like a memory surfacing from somewhere deep and forgotten. His eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. He reached out slowly, and both girls grabbed his hands without hesitation, without fear, only trust. Pure, absolute trust. Sarah's heart began to race. She had tested dozens of people over the past month. Not one had passed. Not one had looked at her homeless family with anything close to the tenderness radiating from this man. But this was something else. This wasn't just kindness. This was recognition, connection, something spiritual and undeniable. Frank stood slowly, still holding the twins' hands for a moment before letting go. He looked at Sarah one more time, his voice thick with emotion. Whatever you're going through, you're not alone. I'll come back tomorrow. Check on y'all. Make sure you're safe. He turned to walk away, but kept glancing back at Lila and Luna like leaving them physically hurt. Sarah watched him disappear into the crowd, her mind spinning. She had been searching for someone genuine, someone trustworthy, someone rare. What she hadn't expected, what she couldn't have predicted, was that the man who stopped on that sidewalk, the man who gave everything he had without knowing who she was, the man her daughters reached for like they had known him their entire lives, was the one person in the world whose connection to them ran deeper than kindness. He was their father. And he didn't even know it yet. That night, Sarah returned to her glass and steel penthouse high above the city, still wearing her disguise. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline, her hands shaking as she pulled off the torn scarf. Her assistant, Marcus, waited silently, knowing better than to speak first. "I found him," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I actually found him." Marcus stepped closer. "Found who, Ms. Cooper? A nanny candidate?" "No." Sarah turned, tears streaming down her face. Real tears, not the ones she had manufactured on the sidewalk. "I found him. The man from 6 years ago. The biological father." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Frank A. Barnett. I didn't know his name until today. I didn't know his face. But the twins. Marcus, the twins knew. They felt it. The moment he knelt in front of them, they reached for him like he was theirs," Marcus finished, his eyes wide with shock. Sarah nodded, collapsing into a chair. 6 years ago, during a chaotic emergency delivery in a hospital overwhelmed by a citywide crisis, Sarah's carefully planned surrogate arrangement had collided with administrative disaster. Records were lost. Protocols collapsed. In the confusion, Sarah woke up with 2 daughters whose biological origins were buried in sealed files and paid silence. She had spent millions ensuring no one would ever question their parentage, terrified of losing the only real love she had ever known. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. The man whose genetic material had been mistakenly used in her fertility procedure, a man who had donated to a medical program to save his sister's life, had just walked back into her world. And he had no idea that the homeless family he had just helped with his last $60 was his own flesh and blood. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah looked at her daughters Lila and Luna, sleeping peacefully in their beds down the hall. Children who had just met their father on a sidewalk and instinctively called him home. "I don't know," she admitted. "But something tells me I can't run from this anymore. Frank Barnett stopped on that sidewalk for a reason. And tomorrow when he comes back like he promised." She paused, her voice trembling with fear and hope in equal measure. Tomorrow everything changes. The test was over. The truth was just beginning. Frank came back the next morning. Sarah saw him before he saw her, walking down the sidewalk with that same exhausted grace, his work uniform wrinkled like he'd slept in it. She braced herself, expecting him to have second thoughts, to walk past with averted eyes like so many others who promised to return but never did. Instead, he knelt beside them with a small bag of oranges and a shy, almost apologetic smile. "Thought the girls might like something fresh," he said quietly, placing the bag in Luna's lap. "Vitamin C. Keeps you strong." Lila reached for an orange with both hands, her eyes wide with wonder like she'd been handed treasure. Frank stayed for 20 minutes that morning, asking nothing, just sitting with them in comfortable silence. When he finally stood to leave for work, he looked back 3 times before disappearing around the corner. Sarah felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls. This man wasn't performing goodness. He was living it. The second day, Frank arrived carrying a children's book he'd found at a thrift store, its cover worn but intact. "My mama used to read to me when I was small," he explained, settling onto the curb between the twins. "Figured these beautiful girls might like a story." He opened the book and began reading in a voice that was gentle and unhurried, doing different voices for different characters. Lila and Luna pressed against him on either side, utterly captivated. Sarah watched his calloused hands hold the pages with such tenderness, watched her daughters lean into the stranger like he was shelter itself, and felt her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't afford to show. By the third day, Sarah had begun to believe in something she thought was extinct: genuine human kindness without agenda. Frank arrived that afternoon and noticed their broken stroller leaning against the wall, one wheel jammed and useless. Without a word, he pulled a screwdriver from his work belt and knelt to examine it. "This just needs a little adjustment," he murmured, working the mechanism with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the wheel spun freely. When Sarah tried to thank him, Frank waved her off like the gesture embarrassed him. "It's nothing. Just hate seeing things broken when they can be fixed." Later, as the afternoon sun softened into golden hour, Frank sat cross-legged on the concrete and told the twins about his younger sister. "She was real sick for a long time," he said, his voice steady despite the pain behind his eyes. "But you know what? She never stopped smiling. Never stopped fighting. She taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you love people more than you fear the hard stuff." Lila reached for his right hand. Luna reached for his left. They held him there between them, and Frank's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. Sarah watched this man, this stranger who had nothing, give everything that mattered. Not money, not pity, but presence, dignity, love that asked for nothing in return. When Frank finally left that evening, promising to check on them again tomorrow, Sarah waited until he was out of sight before standing. Her legs were stiff, her back ached from days on concrete, but none of that mattered. She gathered Lila and Luna, signaled for the discreet security team watching from a distance, and made her way to the waiting car parked 3 blocks away. That night, Sarah stood in her penthouse still wearing the torn dress and dirty scarf, unable to remove the costume just yet. Marcus found her staring out at the city lights, silent tears streaming down her face. "Ms. Cooper?" he asked gently. Sarah turned to him, her voice breaking with the weight of certainty and terror combined. "I found him, Marcus. I actually found him." She pressed her hand against the glass, her reflection ghostly and small. Frank Barnett isn't just kind. He's real. And those girls. Her voice cracked completely. Those girls know their father when they see him, even if he doesn't know yet. Marka said nothing, understanding that some truths were too big for immediate words. Tomorrow, Sarah would have to decide whether to continue the test or confess everything. Tonight, she just let herself feel what she'd been running from for 6 years. Hope that maybe, just maybe, broken things could still be fixed. Frank's hands shook as he stared at the production line report, the numbers blurring into meaningless columns. He'd read the same page 3 times without absorbing a single figure. Martinez. His supervisor's voice cut through the machinery hum. Dale Hutchins was a decent man, worn thin by years of watching good workers crack under pressure. My office. Now. The walk across the factory floor felt like a death march. Through the glass partition, Frank watched Dale close the door, his weathered face settling into lines of reluctant authority. I'm going to be straight with you, Dale said, not bothering to sit. Your error rate's up 40% this month. You missed 2 shifts last week. Yesterday, Henderson found you just standing by the conveyor, staring at nothing. He paused, and something softer crept into his voice. What's going on, Frank? Frank opened his mouth, but what could he say? That he couldn't sleep because his mother's house, the house where he'd learned to ride a bike, where his father had taught him to change oil, where every corner held some ghost of better days, was being devoured by interest rates and legal threats? That his sister's voice on the phone last night had sounded like she was drowning? Personal stuff, he managed. I'll do better. Dale sighed. The sound of a man delivering bad news he'd rather swallow. I like you, Frank. You've been solid for 3 years. But I can't protect you much longer. Corporate's watching the numbers. One more slip and it's out of my hands. He clapped Frank's shoulder. Get your head right. Whatever it is, fix it. Frank's phone buzzed during lunch break. Maria. His thumb hovered over the screen before he answered. They're filing next week. His sister's voice was flat, drained of fight. The lawyer says we're out of options. Mom's going to lose everything, Frank. Everything Dad built. How much do we need? 12,000. Might as well be 12 million. A bitter laugh. I've been praying. You believe that? Me praying. Like God gives a damn about people like us. After they hung up, Frank sat in his truck, engine off, watching his breath fog the windshield. $12,000. He had $400 in checking, maybe another $2 in savings. The math was simple. Impossible. He drove without thinking, and somehow ended up near Riverside Park. The soup kitchen's afternoon shift was just starting, a line of weathered faces stretching down the block. And there, sitting on the low brick wall with the twins, was Sarah. She looked up as he approached, recognition flickering behind that practiced distance. The twins' faces brightened immediately. Mr. Frank. Emma, or was it Ellie? Launched herself at his legs. He sat beside them on the wall, unwrapping the sandwich he'd brought from home. Turkey and cheese, nothing special. He split it 4 ways without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You keep finding us, Sarah said quietly, watching her daughters devour their portions. Why? Frank looked at his hands, scarred from factory work, empty of anything that mattered. He thought about his mother's house, about Dale's warning, about the $12,000 he'd never have, about all the ways he'd failed at fixing his own life. I don't know, he said finally, the words raw and true. I just feel like I'm supposed to. The twins finished eating and, with that sudden exhaustion children have, curled up against him. One on each side, small heads heavy on his lap, their breathing slowing into sleep. He sat very still, afraid to wake them, this broken man cradling borrowed warmth. Sarah watched him, really watched him, seeing perhaps for the first time the man who had nothing yet kept giving everything. The man arrived like a storm cloud on a clear day, his cheap suit and hostile energy announcing trouble before he even opened his mouth. Sarah was sitting with Lila and Luna in the small park where Frank usually found them, the twins coloring with sidewalk chalk he'd brought them yesterday. She saw Frank walking toward them from half a block away, his face lighting up when he spotted the girls. Then she saw the man intercept him. Frank Barnett. The man's voice was loud enough to turn heads, designed to humiliate. "You've been dodging my calls for 3 weeks. You think you can just ignore Summit Financial Services?" Frank stopped walking, his shoulders tensing in a way Sarah had never seen. "I told your office I'd have the payment by the end of the month. I'm working double shifts. End of the month isn't good enough." The man stepped closer, aggressive and theatrical, clearly enjoying the power imbalance. "You owe $17,000 in medical debt. We've been patient, Mr. Barnett, but patience has limits. We're prepared to garnish your wages, seize your assets, and pursue legal action if necessary." The man's voice rose deliberately. "Maybe you should have thought about consequences before you." "Before I what?" Frank's voice was quiet but razor-edged. "Before I paid for my sister's cancer treatment? Before I chose her life over my credit score?" Sarah watched Frank's hand shake, watched humiliation and rage war across his face. The twins had stopped coloring, their small bodies tense with fear. Luna whispered, "Mama, why is that man yelling at our friend?" Sarah stood. Something primal and protective surged through her, obliterating every careful boundary she'd constructed. She moved toward the two men with a speed that surprised even herself, placing her body between Frank and the creditor. When she spoke, her voice was no longer the exhausted whisper of a desperate woman. It was steel, authority, power. "You will lower your voice immediately, and you will step back from this man." The creditor blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the transformation. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern." "I'm making it my concern." Sarah's vocabulary shifted without her permission, the billionaire CEO bleeding through the disguise. "Summit Financial Services, you said? License number SFS 47239, headquartered in Midtown, owned by Grayson Capital Partners. Your organization has 43 active complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, 12 of which involve harassment tactics identical to what you're demonstrating right now." She pulled her phone from her pocket, not the burner phone she carried for this disguise, but her actual phone, sleek and expensive. "I can have your supervisor on the line in 30 seconds, or you can leave. Your choice." The man's face went from red to pale. Who are you? Someone you don't want to antagonize." Sarah took a step forward, and the man took a step back. "Frank Barnett's debt will be addressed through proper legal channels with proper documentation and proper respect. This public harassment ends now. Leave." The creditor looked between Sarah and Frank, confusion warring with self-preservation. He chose the latter, walking away quickly while muttering something about crazy people. The moment he disappeared, Sarah felt Frank's eyes on her, heavy with questions she couldn't answer. "Who are you really?" His voice was soft but insistent, hurt bleeding through every word. "That wasn't. You didn't talk like." "Sarah, what's going on?" Sarah opened her mouth, a dozen lies and half-truths forming and dissolving on her tongue. Before she could speak, a black Mercedes SUV pulled smoothly to the curb, its windows tinted dark. Marcus stepped out of the passenger side, his face apologetic but firm. "Ms. Cooper, we need to go." "No. There's been a situation." Frank's eyes went wide. "Ms. Cooper? As in?" He took a step back, his expression cycling through disbelief, betrayal, understanding, and something that looked like grief. "You're Sarah H. Cooper. Cooper Enterprises. The billionaire." It wasn't a question. Lila and Luna ran to Sarah, grabbing her hands, confused and frightened by the sudden tension. Sarah looked at Frank, at this man who had given everything to a woman he thought had nothing, and felt her carefully constructed world collapsing. "Frank, please, I can explain." "Can you?" His voice cracked. "You've been lying to me for a week. Sitting on sidewalks pretending to be homeless while I gave you my last." He laughed bitterly, running his hands over his face. "God, I'm such a fool." "No." Sarah's voice was fierce. "You're not a fool. You're the only real thing I've found in years. That's why Marcus opened the SUV door urgently. 2 more security vehicles were pulling up behind them. Sarah realized with horror that their situation was drawing a crowd, phones already out and recording. She had seconds to decide. "Frank, please. Meet me tomorrow. Let me explain everything. Please." Frank looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the exact moment his heart made a choice she couldn't predict. "Your daughters," he said quietly, his eyes moving to Lila and Luna clinging to their mother. "They're real, at least. That part wasn't fake, was it?" Sarah shook her head, tears spilling over. "They're the only thing that's ever been completely real in my life." Frank nodded slowly, backing away even as Luna reached toward him crying, "Don't go, don't go." His last words were barely audible over the chaos. "I need time to think." Then he turned and walked away, and Sarah felt something inside her shatter that all her billions could never repair. Frank didn't come back for 2 days. Sarah returned to the sidewalk anyway, unable to abandon the routine even though the test was over, even though everything had already fallen apart. She sat with Lila and Luna in their usual spot, the cardboard sign still propped against the wall, but her heart wasn't in the performance anymore. She was just waiting, hoping, praying that Frank would give her a chance to explain. On the 3rd day, she saw him. He was standing across the street, half hidden behind a bus stop shelter, clearly wrestling with whether to approach. Sarah's heart leaped. She started to stand to wave him over, when a voice she'd hoped never to hear again cut through the morning air. "Well, well, well. Sarah H. Cooper, playing dress-up with the common folk." Sarah's blood went cold. She turned slowly to see Marcus Webb standing 10 feet away, his phone held high and recording, a predatory smile stretched across his face. Webb was a senior executive at Hartman Industries, Cooper Enterprises' most aggressive competitor, and he'd been trying to destroy her reputation for years. "You've outdone yourself this time, Sarah. CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company pretending to be homeless? With your children as props." He circled slowly, keeping his phone trained on her. "This is going to make incredible content. Billionaire's poverty stunt exposed. Turn off the camera, Marcus." Sarah's voice was steady despite the panic rising in her chest. She could see people starting to gather, drawn by Webb's loud performance. Across the street, Frank had stepped into full view, his face confused and concerned. "Why would I do that? This is journalism, Sarah. The public has a right to know when the ultra-wealthy mock poverty for whatever sick social experiment you're running." Webb's voice grew louder, more theatrical. "What's the angle here? New reality show? Viral marketing campaign? Or maybe you just wanted to feel like a saint by slumming it with your designer-torn clothes?" "You don't understand," Sarah began, but Webb cut her off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're bored. You're disconnected. So you decided to play poor to see how the other half lives, using your own children as emotional leverage. Tell me, Sarah, how does it feel to exploit poverty for entertainment?" He moved closer, his phone inches from her face. Say something for the camera. Explain yourself to the millions of struggling families you just insulted. Sarah felt Lila and Luna pressing against her legs, frightened by the angry man and the growing crowd. She saw phones appearing everywhere, capturing this moment from every angle. Then she saw Frank pushing through the gathering people, his face a mixture of protectiveness and confusion. Their eyes met across the chaos, and in that instant, Sarah made her choice. You want the truth, Marcus? She stood slowly, pulling off the torn scarf, letting her natural authority flood back into her posture and voice. Fine. I'll give you the truth. She looked directly into his camera. I was searching for someone genuine in a world that treats my wealth as the most interesting thing about me. I was looking for someone who could see my daughters as children, not as access points to a fortune. I was testing humanity, and most of it failed. The crowd pressed closer. Webb's smile widened, smelling blood. And did you find what you were looking for during your little poverty tourism expedition? Sarah's eyes found Frank in the crowd. He stood frozen, absorbing every word, his expression unreadable. Yes, she said quietly, speaking more to Frank than to the camera. I found exactly what I was looking for. Within minutes, it all descended into chaos. Marcus had already streamed the video live. It was spreading like wildfire across social media. Sarah's security team arrived in force, 3 black SUVs creating a barrier between her and the crowd. Marcus retreated, still filming, shouting questions about exploitation and privilege. The legitimate press arrived moments later, satellite trucks and camera crews materializing as if summoned. Sarah tried to reach Frank through the mob, but Marcus was positioned between them, blocking her path deliberately. Frank, she called out, her voice nearly lost in the noise. He turned toward her, and she saw everything in his eyes: betrayal, confusion, hurt, but also something else. Something that might have been understanding struggling to surface through the pain. Her security chief was pulling her toward the SUV, saying something about crisis management and legal exposure. Sarah resisted, still reaching for Frank. It wasn't fake, she shouted over the chaos, desperate for him to hear, to believe. Nothing about you was part of the test. You were the answer, Frank. You were always the answer. She couldn't tell if he heard her. The crowd had swallowed him up. Marcus was still filming, still narrating his poisonous story. Her security team was insisting, pulling harder. Lila and Luna were crying, overwhelmed by the noise and the strangers. Sarah took one last look at the spot where Frank had been standing, whispered a prayer that somehow her words had reached him, and let herself be guided into the SUV. As the door closed and the vehicle pulled away, she caught a glimpse of Frank in the side mirror, standing alone in the thinning crowd, staring after her with an expression she couldn't read. Sarah pressed her hand against the window and wept. Days later, Frank's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Sarah's assistant spoke in clipped, professional tones. Ms. Cooper requested his presence at her office. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The address she provided made his stomach drop. The gleaming spire of Cooper Enterprises, 47 stories of glass and steel that dominated the downtown skyline. Frank rode the elevator in silence, watching the city shrink beneath him. His reflection in the polished doors looked tired, older somehow. The doors opened onto a reception area larger than his entire apartment, all marble and reclaimed wood and abstract art that probably cost more than his truck. Sarah's office occupied the corner of the 45th floor. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled in every direction like a circuit board. She stood with her back to him, silhouetted against that impossible view. You lied to me, Frank said, his voice flat. No preamble. No games. She turned slowly. Even now, even knowing everything, she was beautiful. but her eyes held something raw and desperate. I was afraid. Of what? That I'd treat you different if I knew you had money. He laughed, bitter. You didn't even give me the chance. Everyone treats me different. Sarah's hands twisted together. Every man I've ever dated, every friend I thought I had, they all changed when they saw the accounts, the properties, the name. They wanted access. They wanted pieces of me to auction off. So you tested me. Made me jump through hoops like some trained animal. I was trying to protect my daughters. Her voice cracked. Do you have any idea how many men have pretended to care about them just to get close to my bank account? How many times Lila has asked me why her new friends always want tours of our house? Luna is 7 years old and already skeptical of kindness because she's learned that people always want something. Frank felt his anger waver, but he held firm. That's not fair to them. Or to me. I know. Tears tracked down Sarah's cheeks. I know, and I'm sorry, but Frank, when I saw you with them that first day in the park, when you didn't know who we were, when you just cared, that was real. That was the first real thing I've felt in years. He shook his head, moving toward the door. I can't do this. I can't build something on lies, no matter how scared you were. The office door burst open. 2 small tornadoes of pink backpacks and mismatched sneakers exploded into the room. Lila and Luna somehow escaped from whoever was supposed to be watching them, somehow knowing exactly where to find him. They ran straight to Frank, their faces streaked with tears, their small hands grabbing his with desperate strength. Daddy, don't go, they said together, the word perfectly synchronized. Daddy. The room went silent. Frank felt the blood drain from his face, felt the world tilt sideways. Behind him, he heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath, saw her hand fly to her mouth, her whole body beginning to tremble. The girls held tighter, looking up at him with eyes that held the whole world. The restaurant Sarah chose was quiet, tucked away on a side street where celebrities and billionaires could eat without cameras flashing. Frank sat across from her at a corner table, the twins already asleep in a private room upstairs where Sarah's security detail kept watch. The words still hung between them like smoke. Daddy. They've never, Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. In 3 years, they've never called anyone that. Not once. Frank's coffee sat untouched, going cold. Sarah, what's going on? Why would they? The restaurant door opened with enough force to rattle the windows. Diana Cole swept in like a winter storm, all sharp angles and calculated elegance. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely. Her suit probably cost what Frank made in 6 months, and behind her came 3 men in matching dark suits carrying leather briefcases. The kind of lawyers who billed by the minute and won by intimidation. Well, isn't this cozy? Diana's smile was all teeth, no warmth. The heiress and the charity case, playing house. Sarah stood so quickly her chair scraped backward. You need to leave. Now. Oh, I don't think so. Diana snapped her fingers and one of the lawyers stepped forward, sliding a thick document across the table. I'm filing for emergency conservatorship of Cooper Enterprises, effective immediately, and for legal guardianship of Lila and Luna. Frank saw Sarah's face go white, saw her hands start to shake. You can't, that's insane. Is it? Diana's voice turned silky, dangerous. Let's review, shall we? You're a single mother displaying increasingly erratic behavior, lying about your identity to strangers, allowing your minor children unsupervised contact with unknown men, bringing those same men into their lives with alarming speed. She turned her calculating gaze on Frank. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, did she mention she's been through 4 nannies in 6 months? That the twins have behavioral issues their therapist can't explain? That Sarah herself has been on anxiety medication since. Well, since the adoption. That's enough, Frank said, standing. Diana laughed, cold and sharp. Oh, the knight in tarnished armor speaks. How much is she paying you? Or are you working on commission, hoping for a piece of the fortune? Get out, Sarah whispered, but her voice held no strength. She looked broken, terrified. I have documented evidence of instability. I have concerns about the adoption's legitimacy. Sealed records can be unsealed with the right pressure. And I have questions, Sarah. So many questions about those girls. Diana leaned in close, her perfume expensive and suffocating. Questions about where they really came from. About why you've kept their origins such a desperate secret. Frank looked between them, confusion turning to alarm. What is she talking about? Diana's smile widened into something predatory, triumphant. She picked up her clutch, her lawyers already moving toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. Ask Sarah who their father really is. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Sarah asked Frank to meet her at the one place Diana's lawyers couldn't follow. The roof garden of her penthouse, 40 stories above the sleeping city. The wind carried the smell of night-blooming jasmine and distant rain. She stood at the railing, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with the weight of what she was about to say. 6 years ago, I wanted children more than I'd wanted anything in my life. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this confession 1,000 times in mirrors and empty rooms. But my body wouldn't cooperate. 3 rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages, doctors telling me it wasn't going to happen naturally. Frank waited, the city lights blurring below them into rivers of gold and red. So I found a surrogate. A good woman, kind, healthy. Everything was arranged, everything was perfect. I was going to have a baby. 1 baby. A daughter. Sarah turned, and her face was raw with old pain. The delivery was scheduled at Mercy General. March 15th, 8 in the evening. But at 7:47, the power grid failed. Some kind of cascading failure that knocked out 6 city blocks, including the hospital's backup generators. The wind picked up, carrying her words away and bringing them back. They had emergency protocols, battery-powered equipment, but it was chaos, Frank. Absolute chaos. My surrogate went into distress, the baby's heart rate dropping, complications with the placenta. They rushed her into or 3 for an emergency C-section. But or 4 was already occupied. Another woman, another emergency delivery happening at the exact same time in the dark with nurses running between rooms and doctors shouting orders and everything falling apart. Frank's chest tightened. He already knew where this was going, could feel the truth like a stone in his stomach. I woke up in recovery with 2 babies. Sarah's voice cracked. 2 perfect, identical girls. Lila and Luna. The nurses said congratulations. The doctor said they'd need to sort out the paperwork, that the blackout had corrupted files and records were mixed between rooms. I asked about the surrogate. She'd been paid and released, left the hospital during the confusion. I tried to find her later, but she'd moved, disconnected her phone, vanished. Sarah. I don't know which baby was mine. The words came out broken, desperate. I don't know if they both were, if neither was, if the embryos were mixed, if there was a mistake in the or, if I don't know Frank. The genetic testing was inconclusive because my eggs were used for the IVF but the documentation was destroyed. The hospital's records were catastrophically incomplete. 6 different people gave me 6 different stories. She wrapped her arms around herself, shaking despite the warm night. So I paid millions to seal the records. I paid lawyers, hospital administrators, anyone who could make the questions go away. I had judges certify the adoption, had documents created that would stand up in any court. I made those girls legally, irrevocably mine because I couldn't lose them, Frank. I couldn't. And Diana. Diana worked in Mercy General's legal department. She was there that night. She knows everything. The chaos, the missing records, the gaps I can't explain. Sarah's laugh was bitter and broken. She was my friend. I trusted her. And now she's going to use it to take everything from me. Sarah's hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles went white. The confession wasn't over. Frank could see it in the way she held herself, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the only way forward was to jump. "There's more," she whispered. "Something Diana found that I only confirmed 3 days ago." The city breathed below them, oblivious and eternal. The hospital record she uncovered, the one she's threatening to release, they show more than just chaos and missing paperwork. They show a mix-up in biological samples. Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Frank, do you remember 6 years ago? Did you ever donate genetic material for medical purposes?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His mind spun backward, searching through years of memory until it landed on a moment he'd almost forgotten. The clinic on 5th Street. The pamphlet promising compensation for donors. His sister Emma in the hospital, her medical bills drowning them both, and Frank desperate enough to try anything. The medical trial, he breathed. The fertility research program. They said it was helping couples who couldn't conceive. They paid $2,000. Sarah's sob was answer enough. Due to the power failure and the administrative chaos, samples were mislabeled. Paperwork was corrupted. My surrogate's procedure used what was supposed to be anonymous donor material from the hospital's fertility bank. But she couldn't finish, her voice breaking apart. Frank felt the world tilt sideways, felt his legs give out. He collapsed into one of the garden chairs, his whole body shaking. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The pull he'd felt on that sidewalk. The way Lila and Luna had recognized something in him that defied explanation. The instant bond that everyone had commented on but nobody could explain. The word they'd spoken without understanding why. "Daddy." "They're mine," he whispered, and then louder, his voice cracking. "They're actually mine. Biologically. They're my daughters." "Yes." Sarah sank down beside him, her perfect composure finally shattering completely. "I didn't know, Frank. I swear on everything I have, I didn't know until Diana started her investigation and hired genealogists and threatened to expose the whole thing. But when I got the results 3 days ago, when I saw your name..." "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I was terrified." She grabbed his hands, desperate. "Terrified you'd try to take them away. Terrified you'd hate me for keeping them. Terrified of losing the only real thing in my life." "But Frank..." Her voice dropped to something almost reverent. "That day on the sidewalk when you stopped, when you looked at them like you'd been searching your whole life, I think some part of me knew. Some part of my soul recognized that you were supposed to be there. That you were theirs." Frank wept, his shoulders shaking with the weight of 6 years of unknowing, of 2 little girls who'd called to their father across an impossible distance and found him anyway. The universe had brought them together after all. The courthouse steps were marble and unforgiving, worn smooth by a century of verdicts and broken lives. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and anxiety. Diana sat with her legal team on one side, immaculate and confident. Sarah and Frank sat together on the other, their hands intertwined like lifelines. Diana's lead attorney was a man named Morrison, silver-haired and ruthless. His voice carried the weight of expensive education and countless victories. "Ms. Cooper has demonstrated a pattern of deception, Your Honor. Lying about her identity, concealing critical information about the children's origins, engaging in relationships that show profound instability. As for Mr. Hayes, He turned his cold gaze on Frank. He signed away all parental rights when he donated genetic material anonymously. He has no legal standing whatsoever. But Frank's attorney, a fierce woman named Chen who'd taken the case pro bono after hearing the story, stood with quiet fire in her eyes. Your Honor, we're not disputing the donation agreement. We're presenting evidence of something that transcends legal paperwork. Biological imperative, genetic recognition, the documented bond between these children and their father. She called witnesses, child psychologists who testified about the twins' inexplicable attachment, researchers who spoke about studies showing children could recognize biological parents through instinct alone, teachers who described how Lila and Luna had drawn pictures of the man we're waiting for months before they met Frank. Then the twins themselves took the stand, small and brave in matching dresses Sarah had let them choose. The judge spoke gently, asking them simple questions. Luna, always the bolder one, looked directly at Frank and said, I felt him before I saw him, like he was calling us home. Lila nodded, her voice soft but certain. We knew. We just knew he was ours. When Sarah took the stand, Morrison tried to break her. He brought up the sealed records, the payments, the desperate measures. But Sarah looked at the judge with clear eyes and said, I made mistakes out of fear, but I will not make another one. Frank is their father. I won't fight that. I want him in their lives. I want him in mine. This family was written in the stars long before any of us understood it. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes and iron in her voice, took less than an hour to deliberate. She granted Frank full parental rights and joint custody. She dismissed Diana's corporate conservatorship claims as baseless and punitive. She warned Diana that any further harassment would result in sanctions. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with cameras and reporters. The story had captured the city's imagination. The billionaire, the mechanic, the twins who found their father against impossible odds. Sarah didn't care about the cameras. She took Frank's hand and pulled him close, speaking loud enough for the world to hear. You weren't my test. You were my answer. To everything. Frank kissed her then, deep and real, while flashbulbs exploded like stars. The twins wrapped themselves around both parents' legs, squealing with joy. Frank knelt down, gathering Lila and Luna into his arms, his voice breaking with emotion. I was always yours, he whispered against their hair. I was always coming home.
Thanks for sticking with us until the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, you're in for a real treat with the next one. It's even crazier and more captivating than you can imagine. Don't miss out. Click on the image on your screen now to dive into the next exciting chapter.